I'm actually glad that Mike went before me because I think both the work that he's doing, that they're doing in Compton Unified, and that Elizabeth and Eddie are doing really kind of frame nicely the kind of bridged pedagogical, educational, and therapeutic applications of hip hop, beat making, and media arts that we do at Today's Future Sound. I also want to shout out there's a teacher in Compton Unified that I was kind of like informally collaborating with, Brandon. I'm trying to remember his last name. Award-winning teacher, had the highest scores in the history, math scores in the history of his school. I believe it was a middle school in Compton Unified, and they were trying to figure out how he did it, and it was clearly about the relationship. And this is a teacher whom, I kind of got him to get a couple of the Ableton push units that we use for, which are these machines, which are proprietary controllers for Ableton Live, which is rapidly becoming the go-to music production and beat making software and hardware kind of in the industry in hip hop alongside FL Studio. And so I just want to acknowledge him and teachers like him in Compton Unified and in every school district who are being really progressive, who are the best teachers, who are having Freestyle Fridays. Shout out Khalil Jacobs Fantauzi, with whom we started, I don't know, almost 10 years ago at West Oakland Middle School, our Beats for Lunch program. And I'll show you footage of that in a second, where he had Freestyle Fridays and where we did Beats for Lunch. Literally, we came in during lunchtime for the middle schoolers at West Oakland Middle School and set up beat machines with beat makers. And we've continued to do that and to grow and to expand, expanding outside of Berkeley and Oakland to the greater Bay Area, Los Angeles, across the country and across the world, launching initiatives in El Salvador and Australia that are now self-sufficient and autonomous. And to speak to Mike, what you were saying as well, our motto at Today's Future Sound is, I wish I had this when I was a kid. It's very much in the ethos of each one teach one, intergenerational healing, to counter the kind of intergenerational trauma that we also see that we're up against as well, right? That's in place kind of systemically, historically, socially, politically, etc. So anyway, Dr. Elliot Gann, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of California. I'm also a beat maker, DJ. I don't like to use the term events promoter, more of an activist and organizer, but we do put on beat events, both in person, which we've done for many years, and also you'll see behind me the Global Beat Cypher, which happens every Saturday. We're actually up to number 73. That'll be happening tonight. And that's an adult initiative we have that's kind of trickled down into our youth systems as well, and youth engagement, where we've been pulling beat makers from across the globe who participate in our cipher. We give them, as a sample pack, a free sample pack to remix. And then these beat makers come every Saturday virtually. We restream it on our Today's Future Sound platforms, on YouTube, etc. And they play their remixes or their flips. We're now starting to do in-person events. Shout out to Martha Diaz for helping us to secure the Universal Hip Hop Museum. September 4th, we're doing it. September 3rd, September 5th in New York City. But we've been bringing our participants, the members of the Global Beat Cypher from around the globe, into our virtual classrooms. And so that's something that we've done at Today's Future Sound, where we shifted from in the classrooms to in the virtual classrooms, but still now we had the capacity virtually during COVID to bring folks in through, Zoom, right? And to have them perform live sets. And to me, that was a really special opportunity that maybe wouldn't have happened in the same way, even though, I travel internationally and try to bring people together through these beat ciphers and beat events, showcases, beat battles, right, that we do all over the world. And get folks involved locally in their communities, convert artists to teaching artists. Now we're able to do it, and it kind of came about. And so similarly, I had the pleasure of working with Sebastian Elkubi in Compton, I believe it was in Compton Unified, and coming into his classroom and doing kind of a virtual visit where I shared some of the videos that I'm going to share with you right now. One is just going to kind of identify what it is that we do at Today's Future Sound and very quickly break down the therapeutic beat making model. View Park High School. Yeah, shout out View Park High School. The students were amazing, both the intro class and the advanced class. Oh, LAUSD, my bad. That's right. Ed Campos, you should definitely fly out. Everyone come out, book your tickets now for Labor Day weekend, New York City. We're bringing the whole community together. It's called Together for the First Time. We did it in Oakland and San Francisco. Folks flew out from the East Coast and the Deep South. We got people coming the other direction over to the East Coast. Hopefully Martha's going to be there. She won't have to switch coasts and she can join us. But so what I essentially was doing is what I'm with you, it's kind of a parallel processor. It's kind of meta because I was talking to the kids and the students about all the things that I do as a beat maker, as a psychologist, as a, et cetera, with beat making and music production culture. So I showed them first and foremost our introductory kind of video, which I'm going to start with to introduce what we do at Today's Future Sound.
At Today's Future Sound, we understand that the power of music can change people's lives. We believe that hip-hop music and culture can be a powerful vehicle in addressing a lack of culturally responsive educational, therapeutic, and social interventions for underserved youth in both our local and global communities. Thankfully, music transcends physical limitations, and with perseverance, we have been able to tackle the challenges of 2020 by implementing virtual models and remote workshops to sustain the important work we do with the youth of Oakland and beyond. This year, we continue to develop our working model, but also innovated with the given circumstances of COVID-19. Our beat-making workshops exist to build trust, confidence, and community for all ages. The therapeutic beat-making model, or TBM for short, effectively integrates 3 dimensions that are key for helping support youth who have experienced stress or trauma. Firstly, we know that relationships are the #1 predictor of positive therapeutic outcomes. With this knowledge, we've built a team of experienced teaching artists that are respected experts in their fields and act as musical mentors for the youth.
Relationship building is key to making sure that students not only come because they want to make beats, but that they're building positive relationships with caring adults.
Secondly, the expressive dimension allows students a positive and constructive way to articulate difficult feelings and release stress. Lastly, students build self-confidence and a sense of competency and agency through their mastery of music production.
I learned how to work the beat machine. My favorite thing is my samples, because I like sampling things. I sampled songs from the radio.
We meet our students where they're at, on their headphones. With this, we're able to fulfill a real need in primary and secondary schools, community, and juvenile hall settings where we have pioneered such work. In 2020 alone, our teaching artists have worked with over 2,000 youth. Our flagship program, Beats for Lunch, brings music instructors into schools during lunch hour, providing small group and one-on-one instruction on beat making and music production. Our therapeutic beat making program has now been piloted at several school sites and is actively being utilized in juvenile detention programs and online virtually. Additionally, we've also been using this model with formerly homeless youth and transitioning families. We also work to provide a space for adults and veteran members of the worldwide beatmaking and hip-hop community. At our weekly virtual event, the Global Beat Cypher, we showcase artists from around the world via live stream. It has been consistent since the start of quarantine, substituting for what would have otherwise been our monthly live community events. Our goal for 2021 is to expand our therapeutic beatmaking model into more schools, community, and juvenile.
So I'll stop it there. That's one of the videos that I showed to Sebastian's class, and trying to explain what are the other kind of applications of beat making more immediately than selling beats, than the kind of the immediate kind of things that people think of, like, oh, I can sell my beats to rappers. Nowadays, there's also the whole thing kind of as we view it at Today's Future Sound. We're very much into the idea of beat culture, right? And that producers, in kind of the spirit of the DJ being center stage when hip hop started, have now returned to the forefront, and people are listening to beat tapes, are watching beat performances live, which we're actually putting on, right, in communities across the world, doing beat ciphers, beat battles, beat showcases. This is what we're going to be doing in New York, a 4-day festival where literally people are coming on their own dime from around the country and from Canada to New York just to meet each other in real life, because it's been such an incredible community that we've created. And so we want to model this for the students and tell them there are ways that you can kind of find your tribe. And if you're a beat maker, you can apply these things. And not only can you be a music producer, beat maker who maybe sells beats, maybe gets placements, right, in web and TV formats and radio, etc., but you can also make this into a career pathway in kind of a meta way, right? And you can make this into a career pathway in terms of mental health, and kind of like what Mike was talking about in terms of the career pathways, in terms of broadcasting and stuff like that, getting kids to think about the media literacies and really the importance of, like, creating your own graphic design, creating your own content, your own kind of collateral stuff, right? And so I also showed them, I'm going to share my screen again, I'm also going to show you another video that we showed them that is highly appealing to folks. We used to do a series of events, our beat battles we had at a fried chicken and waffle restaurant called Soul Groove in San Francisco. And so what we did is we would have all you can eat fried chicken and waffles for like $10, and then another $10 to get into the event. And we'd curate all these different beat makers from around the country, around the world. We had folks from New Zealand come out that we had. We had Valette, who is a beat maker, singer, songwriter, engineer. She's super talented, right? We had folks from Detroit come out, and we also had them simultaneously come into our classrooms when they were coming to visit for these adult events. And so here is Battered Beats, and we showed this to the kids, and of course they got hyped, right?
Yes, indeed. You know how it goes down, man. Unlearn the world. Today's future sound. Battered Beat Battle 6. We out here in Soul Group, San Francisco, underground. Producers from all over the Bay Area going head to head for a whole lot of prizes. Fundraising to service all these kids that we take care of. 25 to 3,500 kids in the Bay Area and worldwide, teaching them beat making, songwriting, the history of hip hop, DJing. You know how it's go down. It's crazy out here.
Or only 5. Well, to tell you the truth, in all this excitement, I've kind of lost track myself.
So I'm just going to pause it there. But one of the things that we were talking about in Sebastian's class with the kids was like, okay, what do you think it takes to put on these events? And what, like, really from like a very logistical, practical perspective, like what's involved in that, right? And what do you have to think about? How do you make a profit? How do you secure a venue? Like what are the agreements we had to come to with the venue? And how can you make money with beats and beat culture, with hip hop culture, right? And build community. So these are things that we were really kind of thinking through, and I was answering questions about. And of course, you show people this video that people want, like, oh, I want fried chicken and waffles and beats and underground parties and, you know, parties that look like super lit and cool and stuff. But like, what are the logistics behind that? And how do you get into it? How do you do it, right? So those are things that we were thinking about. Now, another one of the outcomes that we have, which built into the therapeutic beat making model, and I'll talk very quickly about the therapeutic value of it, but is part of our pedagogical program as well, is the final project, which involves both a beat tape and oftentimes a live beats performance with Ableton, which is designed for performing live, and Ableton Push, which is incredibly simple to perform beats live and to compose on. We have elementary schoolers performing their beat sets live as if they were quote unquote DJs, but they're performing it live, right? And so we have here the final, kind of these are examples. This is Wookiee Raptor Beats, which was a site we did in Alameda with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And again, part of the creative process, part of the culminating process of a 12, 15, 30-week program is putting out a beat tape that collects all the beats made with our individual instructors, usually working in small groups with a beat machine, an Ableton Push, and a computer, you know, headphone splitter, and probably 3 or 4 kids at a station with each instructor. We bring it all together. We have a beat cipher at the end of each class and share out. That's part of the group culture and group process. So we're introducing the concept of beat ciphers to them early, right? The idea that this is something we can get together and do, not just rap ciphers, MC ciphers, or dance ciphers, but beat ciphers, right? And then we brainstorm and say, okay, collectively as a group, let's work together collectively. Soft skills, SEL, right, is built into this. So what are we going to do in terms of artwork? And so one kid said raptors, another kid, from Jurassic Park, another kid said Wookiees, third kid said, let's have the Wookiees riding the raptors, and they'll be like raiders, like raiding the city, and explosions and bombs, and then how are you going to represent your community? Oh, the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. Cool. Here, another example, and this is how we kind of integrate 5 elements of hip hop in the work that we do. I had a young lady in the back of class. This was at Paul Revere Elementary. Shout out Rahman Jamal for getting us in there. Young lady in the back of class named Glendy. Glendy was drawing. She wasn't really, beats wasn't her thing, making the beats. She was drawing. And she was drawing on a lined piece of paper. She was doing graffiti style kind of bubble letters of her name. And I saw this. I saw she was kind of like tuned out. And I said, hey, Glendy, we got to have cover art, right? And graffiti is one of the elements of hip hop, and that often leads to graphic design and, kind of career pathways like that. Why don't you help with the album art? Could you please draw the name of the album, which the class decided was going to be Hemlock Beats, and have that ready for us in 2 weeks to go, and then we'll send that to our illustrator who did the rest of these kind of cartoon illustrations. We took iPhone photos of the kids because they wanted to be drawn as cartoons. We sent that lined piece of paper, a picture of that with Glendy had written Hemlock Beats, and all the pictures of all the kids and the instructors, the math teacher too. And then we got this back from the illustrator that we work with, who's a former graffiti writer, who's now a 3D animation expert, an illustrator, graphic designer, right? So really trying to make use of all the elements and really think about kind of like Mike was saying in terms of media literacy and media arts, all these kind of different dimensions and extensions and applications of hip hop culture. This was a workshop we did in Hobart, Australia, Tasmania, about 2 years ago. We got a grant from the city of Hobart, myself and Dr. Alexander Crook from the University of Melbourne, to do research on the therapeutic impact of short-term workshops. And the really interesting thing that we found was it was predominantly young ladies and young women who attended the workshop. And this was not a finding we thought we were going to get. The reason they said that they came to the workshop was because it was put on by a reputable and well-known organization. Instead of being invited to guys' studios that they didn't really know or who might be trying to take advantage of them or kind of questionable situations, it was a safe, open space, kind of like how Girls Make Beats and other organizations like that provide, right? And so they said that they really felt safe in this environment, in a reputable organization and kind of a more public space. We did it in an arts center. And that was one of the interesting findings we had. And this was the cover art that they collaboratively came up with. And the idea here was they said that they were really about community, right? That community was important to them, and thus free tacos. The Tasmanian Devil is giving out free tacos. It's Tassie Tiger Tacos. And you have in the background, representing their community, it's like old fog Mary, it's old something fairy. It's like the fog that comes down the mountain in Tasmania. That's like a whole thing there. Finally, in Sydney, Australia, where we've worked in schools, we've been helping some of the schools there to implement hip-hop in their school culture, including building a studio into the actual school, and literally from kindergarten through grade 6, building and emceeing, rapping as a literacy intervention, beat making, podcasting, music production. Big shout out to Hilltop Road Public School in Sydney, Australia, doing amazing things. I consulted with them for 4 or 5 years ongoingly to implement this and brought in local hip-hop heads that we trained there, part of our Today's Future Sound volunteer staff in Australia. So they and Auburn Beats, which is a neighboring school, Auburn Beats did an intensive masterclass for a week when I came there, and I brought instructors with me in the classroom. And so every day, 3 different sets of students for an hour and a half for 5 days had intensive master classes, and they brought both kids who were kind of struggling emotionally and behaviorally, and then top tier students, so it wouldn't just be a stigmatizing thing we're sending the bad kids to beat making or whatever, right? They're both kind of identified groups of kids working together collaboratively to create an album. And so we came up with this. There are a lot of Muslim families in the community, so that they wanted to have a young lady breaking with a hijab. We also have, if you look closely, what they call bin chickens in the background. They go into the garbage. They're kind of like seagulls, if you will, or pigeons of Sydney and Australia that are eating out the garbage and playing the beat machine, and then literally a picture of their school in the background. So I just want to kind of finish up by saying that I think beat making has rapidly become an incredibly developmentally as well as being culturally responsive kind of phenomenon and popular thing. When we're talking about youth and about working with youth, both BIPOC youth and youth in general in the United States and around the world, I can speak, having taught on across 6 continents and multiple different countries and juvenile halls across the world. Technology, using technology and beat making, which is now the fundamental technology that's being used for all genres of music production. You can hear trap, snaps, and country music these days. That's really the way to do it. And beat making has grown massively. It's a really powerful STEM initiative that we've been doing for years, advocating for it as a STEM and STEAM initiative, and using beat making, music, hip hop production, music culture, hip hop culture, which inherently builds in STEAM, entrepreneurship, innovation, the idea of remixing technologies, all these kind of things. And I'll just say as a last point, an illustration of this that I use and that I've written about in kind of the therapeutic beat making articles that we published with Dr. Raphael Travis and Dr. Alexander Crook, is as the turntables were not built as instruments, but were transformed into both rhythmic and melodic instruments through hip hop and DJing culture and now beat making culture, as it were, that came from that. So too has the TR-808 kick drum that's prominent, the prominent bass that you hear in contemporary hip hop and trap and kind of drill and that kind of thing, was transformed from being just a percussive instrument into a melodic instrument that was repurposed, kind of transformed and reappropriated by hip hop producers more recently. And we can see how hip hop is always reimagining technology and culture, is always the leading forefront, right? And there's no EDM, there's no house music, there's no any kind of EDM, electronic dance music, or anything like that without hip hop. It's all related back to hip hop, to the break, to DJ Kool Herc, etc. So yeah, with that, Martha, are we opening up to questions, or what are we doing next?
I think there is one question from Mark Swope.
Oh, yeah. He said, I'm classically trained with a history of heavily European white male dominated music. I teach high school and I'm transitioning to hip hop. Suggestions, private lessons? Yeah, I teach private lessons and so do all of my staff. And I can train you in our kind of beat making pedagogy that we've been developing over a decade. We've been teaching elementary, middle, and high schoolers how to make beats for, I've been teaching since 2003. And would be happy to share that with you. And we train folks all over the world. We've launched beat making programs in New Orleans, in Texas, in Australia, in El Salvador, in Peru, in Colombia, all over the world, and in Cape Town with Emil YX. So happy to share that pedagogy with you. Just hit me up, and I will put our information and my information in the chat. And yeah, I think it's all about learning from practitioners, and I think it's important to be bringing in practitioners of the culture, hip hop practitioners, into our classrooms and having them teach you, teach us, teach our students, and also bringing pedagogues into the fold and educational and therapeutic experts, licensed clinicians who can then teach and share their knowledge, their expertise and training with us cultural practitioners, and having that exchange and that co-collaboration and building. But this co-facilitation model is something that Dr. Alexander Crook has written about and researched at University of Melbourne and really done a great job. So I would recommend that, and I'm happy to share articles, resources, etc. Tyler, I would agree that 808 never gets old, and teaching kids to tune their kick hits so important. No more out-of-tune 808s. Not happening in 2021. Should not be happening. So props to you, Tyler.
I have a question, Elliot, and this might be maybe a challenge to the approach, but I'm wondering what your take is on it. Because when we talk about kind of generational gaps, right? I've heard mainly from a more old school generation that the transfer from live instruments into digital instruments was kind of like, a breakaway from, some of the power of music. So I wonder what your thoughts are on, can beat making be a gateway back into live instruments? Do you notice that in your classrooms? Are kids getting interested in like, oh, I want to, learn how to, or kids that are already taking instruments? How can we bridge that gap maybe in doing both? Have any of your classes done that?
Totally. That's something that we have thought deeply about and address. So when we're teaching, our lesson plan includes a basic introduction to time signature, which you, Rahman, clearly teach in your pedagogy, which I think has been amazing and really innovative. Shout out to you for introducing that in rap flows and really transforming like paradigm shift for students understanding rhythm and rapping and cadences and such things. So we, as you know, teach the, what 4/4 is. That we teach a basic understanding of time signature, like just 4/4, but also not only the rhythmic components, because you need that for drum programming, even if you're doing kinesthetically, even if you're doing an abstract representation on a drum machine, like this, a step sequencer. But also we're teaching the fundamentals of melody, scales, and harmonies, and differentiating. That's part of our vocabulary that we're teaching. What's a melody? What's harmony? What does it mean to compose a melody? And that's part of our pedagogy and our curriculum and our lesson plans built into it, right? We teach about sampling, and we show videos that map to each unit and are, didactic with respect to each unit, right? So this is what melody is. Let's illustrate it visually. Let's illustrate it kinesthetically. And so in teaching that, when you have a piano keyboard, a MIDI keyboard like this, right, that has pads and knobs and keys on it, we're teaching them both on the push, how to compose melodically and harmonically, but also on here. And we're teaching about major and minor scales, right, and chords, and teaching them. And so we're saying, hey, if you see a piano and you see 2 black keys, then 3 black keys, and 3, what does that mean? And how do you use this? What's the code, right? How's a minor key different from a major key? Minor key is more sad or angry sounding typically for Western music. A major key sounds happier, right? And teaching them the idea of scales and octaves. And that's a really powerful way, as is music production. You'll find that beat makers and music producers, with Madlib as a primary example and illustration, went from making beats and sampling and appreciating the sonic textures, the melodies, the harmonies that we're chopping. When we're sampling, we can create new melodies by reorganizing micro chops or subcomponents of the samples into new ways. That's a new way of making a new melody and remixing. But also composing bass lines and composing melodies and harmonies. That's an entry point that is culturally and developmentally responsive, right, and informed, where you can then make it relevant to their reality and make it useful. And that's what we have to do with all content and experiences and skill sets we're trying to teach. You have to make it relevant, right? And that's the premise of hip-hop therapy, right, and of therapeutic beat making. It's like a gummy vitamin. Like one of my instructors in Los Angeles, Asterix Music, Mario Miranda, with whom I do a lot of therapeutic beat making groups, who's in Carson, right outside of Compton. He talks about the gummy vitamin. So we're making it palatable, relevant, and then you can have that backward trajectory. And in the same way that our pedagogy and our model uses the idea of constructing, teaching the component parts, how to make beats, which then allows students to think critically with critical listening skills and critical media skills to deconstruct the gestalt wholes, the songs they hear. And literally, this is part of the research that we did in the Mindful Beat study in Daly City, where we saw that students and students' parents, especially parents, had identified in the kind of outgoing interviews, right, the exit interviews. I had 2 or 3 different parents who said to me, my kid listens to music differently in the car. They're talking about snare drums, and I don't even know what they're talking about, right? They're saying, hey mom, listen to that snare drum. When you have a child who's telling you to listen to the snare drum, you know you've done your job in beginning that process and teaching critical listening and media literacy skills. The capacity to look at a whole and be able to break it down into its component parts is part of critical literacy, right? And being able to really think. And also, of course, in terms of critical literacy and critical race theory, we're also, and shout out to Dr. Itoko Garcia, who's doing amazing work in Marin County and used to be in Hayward Unified, in terms of helping students also to identify, in terms of critical literacy, what are the voices that are missing from the narratives that we're hearing. And part of that is teaching the history of hip hop, which is American history, world history, that should, and I know Martha's been advocating for this for years, should be included in the textbooks, the American history textbooks, the world history textbooks, seeing as it's the most culturally impactful musical phenomenon, popular cultural and music since 1963. And there's a British study they did, a empirical quantitative analysis, meta-analysis they did that shows that, as well as the #1 most listened to genre of music in the United States and in the world. So there's no denying, based on evidence, that this is the most dominant cultural medium. And I don't think that the OGs should get upset that the kids aren't learning, music theory right away. It's just, it's a way that we have to usher them in a way that's meaningful. Because you could be that curmudgeonous OG, oh, you should listen to boom bap, they don't make it like they used to. Kids are not trying to listen to that. they're trying to listen to trap and drill. And you got to meet them there and show them how to make drill beats and show them how to make Euro drill using melody, harmony, music theory, and scales that's immediately applicable.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any plans to incorporate virtual reality beat making experiences like Electronauts VR music reality engine?
So yeah, we're working with an initiative, the Black Hawk Initiative, which is actually a U.S. State Department funded initiative in San Francisco that recreates in augmented reality the Black Hawk, I think it's Black Hawk Theater in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, a historical jazz club. And so we'll be doing at Bodecker Park in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, a series of beat making workshops using also kind of this augmented reality where you can put on the goggles and then you see where the theater actually used to be in these virtual billboards which will have student art. So we're part of an initiative that is kind of doing that. I think virtual reality beat making is a really interesting idea considering we're already kind of doing that through Zoom. Like I collaborate with beat makers all around the country and the world virtually through Zoom, doing screen shares like I did, right? We're using Loopback, which gives a virtual real-time sharing of audio. And we also have audio movers, right, which gives you very low latency sharing of sound, of high fidelity, high bit rates like audio shares. And I think that it would be really interesting to kind of look more into that, how we could do that. I also want to be cognizant of and push back against the virtual stuff, even despite COVID and where we are currently, and say that being physically present and proximate with other humans is extraordinarily important for our nervous system, well-being, and mental health, right? And that's super important for our mental health, for learning, for the cipher, for hip-hop, how it started, the community of hip-hop, right? So yes, the virtual stuff we're doing is amazing, it has been transformative, but I think it's also important, however we can, to get back to whatever kind of safely well thought out in-person things we can do, because we're literally and figuratively dying for it.